Most people think a bigger harvest means buying more pots, more soil, and more plants. So they keep adding containers to their patio, keep spending money at the garden center, and keep hoping that somehow more equals more food. But after years of watching container gardens succeed and fail, one truth becomes obvious. The gardeners who harvest the most aren't the ones with the most pots. They're the ones who understand a handful of small, repeatable habits that quietly double what a single plant can produce. In fact, some of the heaviest potted harvests you'll ever see come from the smallest setups. A single tomato plant on an apartment balcony, a row of peppers on a fire escape, a handful of pots crammed onto a tiny concrete patio. The size of the space was never the deciding factor, the strategy was. Over time, these habits have proven themselves again and again, turning ordinary potted plants into some of the most productive food sources a home gardener can have. Today, we're counting down 10 proven tips that can genuinely double your harvest from potted plants. Some take 30 seconds to apply, others cost nothing at all, but together, they can be the difference between a few sad tomatoes and a container garden you can barely keep up with. Let's get into it. Number 10. Stop underestimating your pot size. At number 10, stop underestimating your pot size. This is one of the most common and most invisible mistakes potted plant owners make. A seedling looks small, so it gets planted in a small pot. That feels logical in the moment, but it quietly limits everything that happens for the rest of the season. A container isn't just a home for a plant. It's the entire world that plant will ever know. Every root, every drop of water, every nutrient the plant will ever access has to fit inside that space. When the pot is too small, the roots hit a wall almost immediately. They circle instead of spreading. Growth stalls, flowering slows down, and the harvest that follows is a fraction of what the same plant could have produced in the right size container. Most people don't realize how much bigger their pots need to be. A tomato or pepper plant that looks perfectly happy in a small nursery pot will eventually need a container that holds several gallons of soil to reach its full potential. Give it less, and you're not being efficient. You're capping your own harvest before the season even starts. The fix is simple. Whenever you're unsure, size up. A slightly larger pot costs a little more soil, but it pays that back many times over in fruit. And once your plant actually has enough room to build a real root system, the next habit becomes even more important, because a bigger root system needs to be fed properly to reach its full potential. Number 9. Feed little and often, not big and rare. At number 9, feed little and often instead of big and rare. This is where most potted plants quietly fall apart in the middle of the season. They start out strong, full of energy from fresh potting mix, and then somewhere around the 6 or 8 week mark, growth slows, leaves turn pale, and flowering drops off. The plant looks tired because it is tired. It's run out of food. Unlike a garden bed, where nutrients are constantly being replenished by organic matter breaking down in the surrounding soil, a container is a closed system. Every time you water, a little bit of nutrition washes out the bottom. Every fruit you harvest takes nutrients with it. There's no reserve to fall back on, which means the plant is entirely dependent on you to keep the supply coming. The mistake most people make is overcorrecting. They notice the plant looking weak, so they dump in a heavy dose of fertilizer all at once. That can shock the roots and cause more harm than good. What actually works is the opposite approach. Small, consistent feedings on a regular schedule, whether that's a diluted liquid feed every week or two, or a slow-release fertilizer worked into the soil at planting time. This is especially critical for heavy producers like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash. Every single fruit those plants push out has to be built from something, and if the nutrients aren't there, production simply stops. Gardeners who commit to a steady feeding rhythm often see their harvest numbers climb dramatically, not because they changed the variety or the location, but because the plant finally had enough fuel to keep producing all season long. And once your plant is properly fed, the next habit determines whether that food actually gets used. Number 8. Water deep, not shallow. At number 8, water deep, not shallow. This might be the single most misunderstood part of growing anything in a container. Because pots dry out faster than garden beds, the instinct is to give a small splash of water every single day. It feels responsible. It feels attentive. It's actually working against you. Shallow, frequent watering trains roots to stay near the surface, right where the soil heats up fastest and dries out fastest. Those roots become fragile and dependent, and the plant ends up stressed every time watering is even slightly delayed. This is one of the biggest reasons potted plants wilt dramatically in the middle of a hot afternoon, even when they were watered that same morning. The better approach is to water thoroughly and less frequently. Soak the container until water runs freely out of the drainage holes at the bottom, which confirms that moisture has reached the entire root zone, not just the top inch of soil. Then let the top layer dry out somewhat before watering again. This rhythm pushes roots to grow deeper into the container, chasing moisture that stays available longer, and deeper roots build a stronger, more resilient plant. There's a bonus benefit here too. Nutrients move through the soil more evenly when you water deeply, which means the fertilizer you're applying actually reaches the roots that need it instead of sitting near the surface. Gardeners who switch to deep, less frequent watering often notice thicker stems and steadier growth within just a couple of weeks. And once your watering habits are dialed in, the next tip helps you protect all of that hard-earned moisture. Number 7. Mulch every single pot. At number 7, mulch every single pot. This is one of those tips that sounds too simple to matter, which is exactly why almost nobody does it. Gardeners will spend money on premium soil and name-brand fertilizer, then leave the entire surface of the container completely exposed to direct sun. Bare soil in a pot heats up fast and loses moisture even faster. On a hot day, the top layer of an uncovered container can become hot enough to stress the roots just beneath it, and the water you added that morning can evaporate before the plant ever gets to use it. That means more watering, more stress, and less consistent growth.
A simple layer of mulch changes all of that. Straw, shredded leaves, bark, or even a layer of compost on top of the soil acts like insulation.
It slows evaporation, keeps root temperatures more stable, and reduces how often you need to water in the first place. During a heat wave, this one habit alone can be the difference between a plant that keeps producing and one that shuts down completely. Mulch also helps keep weed seedlings from taking hold in the surface soil, and it makes your containers look noticeably more finished. Most gardeners who start mulching are surprised by how much less they end up watering, and even more surprised when their plants respond with steadier, healthier growth within weeks. It's one of the cheapest upgrades you can make, and it keeps paying off for the entire season. Speaking of paying off all season, the next tip is about making sure your plant never runs out of room to grow upward. Number 6. Train everything to grow vertically. At number 6, train everything to grow vertically. Most people planning a container garden think entirely in terms of footprint. How many pots fit on the balcony? How much floor space is available? How far apart the containers need to sit? Experienced growers think about something else entirely: the air above that footprint. Take a cucumber plant as an example. Left to sprawl, it takes up an enormous amount of space and produces fruit that's harder to find and easier to damage. Put that same plant on a simple trellis or a cage, and it occupies a tiny footprint while often producing even more, because the improved airflow around the leaves reduces disease and the plant can put more energy into fruit instead of managing a tangle of vines. Beans, cucumbers, small melons, and even some squash varieties all respond beautifully to vertical support. The fruit hangs cleanly where you can see it. It stays cleaner because it's not sitting on wet soil, and harvesting becomes dramatically easier because you're not digging through foliage to find what's ripe. This single change can transform the output of a small space. The same container that used to produce a modest harvest sprawling across the ground can produce 2 or 3 times more when the plant is trained to climb instead. A cheap trellis, a tomato cage, or even a few stakes and some twine is often all it takes. And once your plants are climbing efficiently, the next habit ensures you're not wasting a single one of those fruits once they're ready. Number 5. Pick early and pick often. At number 5, pick early and pick often. This tip goes against almost everyone's first instinct, which is to leave fruit on the plant a little longer, hoping it gets bigger. Bigger feels like more. In reality, it's usually the opposite. From the plant's point of view, the entire goal of producing fruit is to create seeds. Once it senses that it has successfully matured a fruit to full size, it treats that job as done and starts slowing down new flower production. That means every zucchini you let grow to an enormous size, every bean pod you leave hanging just a little longer, every pepper you wait to fully ripen before picking, is quietly telling the plant to ease off. Harvesting earlier and more frequently sends the opposite signal. It tells the plant its job isn't finished, so it keeps flowering and keeps setting new fruit to replace what was just removed. Gardeners who harvest every few days instead of once a week are often shocked at how much more total food they collect over a full season, even though each individual fruit is smaller. There's a flavor bonus here too. Younger vegetables are almost always more tender and better tasting than oversized ones. So this isn't just a productivity trick, it's also a quality upgrade. The gardeners who seem to harvest non-stop all summer aren't growing different plants than everyone else. They're simply picking earlier and picking more often, and their plants are rewarding them for it. Once you've got a rhythm of frequent harvesting going, the next tip: make sure your plant has the raw ingredients to keep responding. Number 4, match the plant to the pot, not the other way around. At number 4, match the plant to the pot, not the other way around. A lot of potted plant struggles trace back to one simple mismatch. Someone falls in love with a large, sprawling variety and tries to force it into a container that was never going to support it. Some plants are naturally suited to compact growing. Lettuce, herbs, and many leafy greens have modest root systems and thrive in smaller containers without any trouble. But tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash need real room to build the kind of root system that supports heavy fruiting. Cram one of these into an undersized pot, and it will spend the entire season fighting for water and nutrients instead of putting energy into growth. Beyond just size, container material and shape matter too. Deep, wide pots hold more moisture and buffer temperature swings far better than short, shallow ones, which matters enormously during a heat wave. A well-matched container creates a stable environment where the plant can focus entirely on producing instead of surviving. Many gardeners who upgrade an undersized pot to something more appropriate are stunned by the difference. The variety didn't change, the gardener's skill didn't change, the container did, and suddenly the same plant that struggled for months takes off. Getting this match right at the very beginning of the season is one of those small decisions that quietly shapes everything that follows. And once you've got the right container for the right plant, the next tip is about choosing varieties that were practically born for pot life. Number 3. Choose varieties that are built for containers. At number 3, choose varieties that are built for containers. Not every plant treats a pot like a compromise. Some genuinely perform better in containers than they ever would in open ground, and knowing which ones those are can dramatically change your results. Cherry and grape tomato varieties are a perfect example. While large slicing tomatoes can be demanding and sprawling, many compact cherry varieties thrive in pots and produce astonishing quantities of fruit relative to their size. Peppers behave similarly, with their naturally compact root systems making them well suited to container life. Bush-type beans, compact cucumber varieties, and most herbs also perform exceptionally well in pots because containers give you precise control over drainage and soil quality that's hard to replicate in the ground. The mistake many beginners make is asking the wrong question. They ask whether a plant can survive in a container, when the better question is which plants actually prefer it. Shifting that mindset changes everything about how a container garden performs. Instead of fighting genetics, you're working with them. Gardeners who deliberately choose container-friendly varieties consistently report healthier plants and heavier harvests with less daily effort, simply because they stopped trying to force the wrong plant into the wrong situation. And once you've picked the right varieties, the next tip is about making sure every single pot is working for you at every point in the season, not just for a few weeks. Number 2. Keep every pot working, season after season. At number 2, keep every pot working, season after season. This is one of the biggest differences between a casual potted plant owner and someone who genuinely doubles their harvest. It has nothing to do with what's growing. It has everything to do with how the container is used over time. Most people plant something in spring, harvest it once, and then let the empty pot sit there for weeks, sometimes for the rest of the summer. That empty container is wasted potential. It still has soil, it still has a spot in the sun, and it's producing absolutely nothing. The alternative is to think of every pot as valuable real estate that should almost always have something growing in it. Lettuce or spinach in the cooler weeks of early spring. Replace the moment it starts to bolt with a heat-loving crop like beans or cucumbers, which then gets replaced again in the fall with another round of cool weather greens. That single container just delivered 3 separate harvests in 1 year, using the same soil, the same pot, and barely any extra effort. This approach, often called succession planting, is one of the most powerful ways to increase total output without buying a single additional pot. Every time one crop finishes, something else is ready to take its place, which means the container is never sitting idle and never wasting its potential. Gardeners who adopt this mindset stop measuring success by how many pots they own and start measuring it by how hard each pot is working for them. And that mindset leads directly into the single most important habit on this entire list. Number 1. Grow for continuous harvests, not one-time ones. At number 1, grow for continuous harvests, not one-time ones. This single principle might be responsible for more total food than every other tip on this list combined, because it changes the entire way you think about what a productive plant actually looks like. Most people focus on what they can grow. The gardeners who consistently double their harvest focus on how long they can keep harvesting from the exact same plant. Think about the difference between a crop that fruits once and finishes, compared to one that keeps producing steadily for 4, 5, or 6 months from that same container, using the same water and the same sunlight. One of those delivers dramatically more total food over a season, even if it never looks as impressive on any single day. This is why leafy crops like chard, kale, and many herbs are so valuable in a container setup built around maximizing harvest. You can pick from them again and again without ever pulling the plant, and every harvest triggers new growth to replace what you took. Tomatoes, peppers, and beans work on a similar principle when you keep harvesting frequently instead of letting fruit sit and mature fully, because frequent picking keeps the plant in constant production mode rather than letting it wind down after one big flush. The gardeners chasing the single biggest tomato or the most dramatic-looking harvest photo often miss this entirely. A plant that gives you a little bit every single week for months will almost always outproduce a plant that gives you one enormous burst and then quits. Once you start designing your container garden around continuous production instead of one-time results, every single pot becomes more valuable because it's working for you for longer, and that's really the secret behind doubling a potted harvest. It was never about buying more containers or spending more on fertilizer. It's about applying a small set of habits consistently all season long. Size your pots properly, feed them steadily, water deeply, mulch the surface, harvest often, match the plant to the container. Choose varieties built for pot life. Keep every container working. Train your plants to climb. And above everything else, aim for harvests that keep coming, not harvests that happen once and disappear. Do that, and you'll discover something a lot of potted plant owners never expect. You don't need a yard at all to grow a serious amount of food. Some of the most productive little gardens in the world are sitting on balconies, porches, and tiny patios, run by people who simply stopped guessing and started applying a handful of proven habits, one pot at a time.